we would like to welcome Professor Donald Scott to the control room of Black Op Radio. I'm very interested in all the work that Professor Scott has done. And going back today, I thought we would talk just about the journal Degenerative Diseases, and maybe give you a few here and let you just give me a few of your observations and memories of the different issues there, and then we'll talk about the upcoming issues that are going to be a book. My first one was back in 2004, and I think that introduction is was the one of the AIDS virus. Yeah, it's quite a striking cover.
Yes, to an electronic microscopic picture of a particle of human DNA. Now, the amazing thing is that the ordinary picture of the DNA, and I thought we had a picture of it here somewhere, but I haven't seen this particular issue for a year and a half now. But in one of these journals, it shows the DNA naturally, and this particular picture on the cover of this issue shows what happens to the DNA when nicotine from tobacco is blown on it.
Oh, really?
And the DNA loses its normal pattern and forms a crystalline cross. And it's so startling because all the crosses are perfectly formed, quite beautifully created, and we wanted to put it on the cover to show what happens to DNA when it's exposed to nicotine, so that smokers can understand how dangerous they're being to themselves when they smoke.
Now, you, along with the journal, you have an annual
Conferences?
Yeah, conferences. The Common Cause Medical Research Foundation, I guess, is holding these. And this year, can you tell us about this year's?
Yes, we can talk about the conference this year, which was held in Sudbury. We have held a conference in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Rochester, New York,
Right, and that's the cover
Hartford, Connecticut, and this year it was held in Sudbury, and we had a number of speakers presenting points of view that one doesn't normally get a chance to hear or to think about. And it's along the line of the Black Ops radio idea that tell people some of the realities that are going on that don't get out in the mainline media. And we had, for example, at our conference this year, Dr. Garth Nicholson. Now, Dr. Garth Nicholson is an extremely talented scientist who, along with a Dr. Singer, was the scientist who explained really for the first time how physically the human cell's membrane is able to function and allow certain things into the cell that are necessary for the cell's functioning and survival, and keep certain things out of the cell and the rest of it. And the membrane of the cell, they had a very hard time understanding how it worked until Drs. Nicholson and Singer, after a great deal of research, came up with what they call the fluid mosaic model of cell membrane. And sounds complicated and scientific and not of much interest to the average citizen. But when you realize that a very, very significant number of vital diseases such as AIDS, chronic fatigue syndrome, Wegener's disease, Kabuchi's disease, Parkinson's disease, diabetes type 1, and even Alzheimer's are caused when the cell membrane is damaged and ultimately destroyed. And then you ask yourself the question, what was it that destroyed this cellular membrane? You have to go back to Dr. Nicholson's work, and you have to go back to other work, and you find out that there is a microorganism which causes a great deal of damage to the human body that is known to the leading scientists of North America, but is not passed on to the general practitioners who are treating people who are ill. And that microorganism is called the mycoplasma. And the mycoplasma is simply a particle of bacterial DNA. And when the bacteria is killed, that particle of the DNA tries to find a cell in the human body or in other animals or even in plants and trees. The research demonstrates that trees, for example, can suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome, and just as well as human beings do. Well, we had Dr. Nicholson, this leading scientist who has pioneered this great and important study and who demonstrates that many of these diseases, again, I mentioned the key ones, for example, Parkinson's and AIDS, are caused when the cell membrane is destroyed and the cell dumps its contents into the blood or the plasma. And then we tracked it to, well, what causes the cell membrane to deteriorate and rupture, and we learned there's a mycoplasma. And then we learned, as I say, that the U.S. government, a number of years ago, began to research the mycoplasma very, very rigorously, and they got to the point where they patented. Now, don't ask me how they can get this through a patent office, but the U.S. government was able to patent what they call the pathogenic, that is disease-causing, the pathogenic mycoplasma. And in that patent, which is about 85 pages long and a marvelous document to read, it says, now this is in a patent held by the United States government, and the main work was done by their leading medical doctor researcher, Dr. Shyh-Ching, President and Director of the American Institute of Pathology. And in that patent, he says, people who are infected with the mycoplasma will be patients who have been diagnosed by their physician as having, and he lists, AIDS, chronic fatigue syndrome, Wegener's disease, Kabuchi's disease, lupus, and on down the line, and he ends up by saying, and even Alzheimer's. Well, if you have a disease agent patented by the United States government, which is involved in all of these diseases, how in the heck is it you haven't heard of it? And most of your listeners will not have heard of it. And even your listeners who are medical practitioners will not have heard of it. Or if they have heard of it, it has been dismissed to them. Now, in one of these journals, and you kind of catch me by surprise by having these number of copies here, so I'm not sure which journal it is. Oh, here it is here. In one of these journals, we have a picture of a medical textbook which is published for the general population of the United States by the Johns Hopkins Medical School. Now you think Johns Hopkins Medical School, that is a prestigious world leader in medical research and all the rest of it. And this book, we published a cover there to illustrate it. It has over 1,800 pages, and it is supposed to be America's #1 medical authority. They say so themselves, nothing modest about them. Johns Hopkins Family Health Book. And if you go through those 1,800 pages by way of the index, nowhere in that book, which is America's #1 health authority, do you even find a mention of the word mycoplasma and of the microbiological or microorganism, the mycoplasma. And yet if you turn to another copy of our journal, you will find the page from the patent reproduced where it says the mycoplasma is involved in AIDS, common chronic fatigue syndrome, Wegener's, sarcoidosis, lupus, and even Alzheimer's. How is it that America's leading researchers and medical people and America's leading medical school say absolutely nothing to the public or to the medical practitioners about the mycoplasma, and yet in their own documentation they indicate what a tragic disease agent it is? And if you're going to treat some of the diseases involved, you have to start by treating the mycoplasma. But if you don't know the mycoplasma even exists, you're not going to treat it. And if you try to refer, for example, to the Johns Hopkins medical book, you won't find anything in there about it. So how are you going to respond to the mycoplasma if A, you don't know it exists, and B, you don't know how to respond, and C, your medical practitioner doesn't know it exists, and so on. And to carry this illustration along a little further, I'm a retired teacher, and I'm a member of the Retired Teachers of Ontario, and in the last newsletter they had a blurb in there: great news, the Johns Hopkins Medical School has put all of this important health information on the web, and if you put in whatever it is, you can then put in any word that you want to know about in terms of its medical significance. So I'm not involved with computers myself because I got enough to do just doing other things. But I asked my son, I said, okay, put in johnhopkinsmedical.com, bologna sort of stuff, and he did it. And I said, now put down mycoplasma and see what comes out.
So you did a search for the word.
Search for mycoplasma. Yeah. And it says, sorry, no information on this subject available. Excuse me.
That's fine.
So then I had him go to the parent of the mycoplasma, which is a bacterium called the Brucella bacterium, or brucellosis bacterium. And again it comes up, sorry, there's no information on this in our data bank. Johns Hopkins University has a program that you can access and it's supposed to give you all the latest information, yet the most critical information, the information that deals with diabetes type 1, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and all the rest of it, is not available to you through that program and that database. And through their textbook here, which you can go down and you buy at a bookstore for $50, $60, not a word in it about this disease agent. Now our goal in the Common Cause Medical Research Foundation is to say, okay, Johns Hopkins University medical textbook says nothing about the mycoplasma. At our conference, let's have someone who's a world leader in the research into the mycoplasma. So one of them is, of course, Dr. Garth Nicholson. I phoned him up in California and I asked him, will you come up to our conference? And he said I would be happy to. And he came to our conference. Now let me give you a little background about Garth Nicholson. He was the director of the M.D. Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. Along with the Cancer Center in Boston, Massachusetts, it's a world leader in cancer research. He was also a professor in 3 different disciplines at the University of Texas Medical School. And Dr. Nicholson was doing research into cancer, doing research into Alzheimer's, doing research into Parkinson's and the rest of it. And he got involved in doing some research into Gulf War illness, because his daughter came back from the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, where she had been a pilot on one of these transport planes, and she became ill with Gulf War illness. So he said to her, well, let's take a sample of your blood and we'll analyze it. They drew her blood and analyzed it, and she's got a mycoplasmal infection. Well, where the heck did she get that? And he writes a study about it, which was published in a medical journal, and he was pleased to put this information before the public, that for some reason or other, people with Gulf War illness have an infection with the Mycoplasma, which is patented by the U.S. government. Shortly after it appeared in print, he was called to the Chancellor's office of the University of Texas. And the Chancellor said to him, Dr. Nicholson, we've seen your article on the Mycoplasma, and we don't want you to publish anything further on the Mycoplasma. And Dr. Nicholson says, well, I'm continuing my research, and I am obliged, professionally, to report what I find. And if I find more information about the Mycoplasma, I will report it in the journals and let people respond to that reality. And he continued his research, wrote another article which published. He was called to the Chancellor's office, and even though there's supposed to be all kinds of protection for professors on faculty and so on for doing research and honest reporting, he was fired from the MD Anderson Cancer Center, and he was fired from the University of Texas. He got an appointment as a director of the Molecular Medical Institute in California, but these very prestigious roles as director of the MD Anderson Cancer Center were taken from him because he was studying the Mycoplasma and discovering its presence in Gulf War illness patients. So he was in touch with us in our journal, and he said, you know, this kind of thing professionals usually keep quiet. But he said, I would like to send the Journal of Degenerative Diseases the correspondence between myself and the University of Texas about what I was doing and about being fired. And he says, you're free to publish it. So we published that information in one of the issues of our journal. I'm not sure the exact volume number and issue number. And it was there for the world to see. Now here's the point. The world is not being told about a disease agent that is involved in all of these, including involved in cancer. The people will tell you, well, we don't know what causes cancer. We know that people who do a lot of smoking develop cancer of the lungs. We know that women who are on certain kind of birth pills develop cancer after a period of time, and the rest of it. But we really don't know the fundamentals of how cancer works and so on. Well, Dr. Shyh-Ching, the guy who patented the Mycoplasma on behalf of the U.S. government, he not only had written an article about the Mycoplasma and all of these other diseases, he wrote an article based on his research where he demonstrated very clearly that the Mycoplasma plays a very important role in cancer, and that if you respond to the Mycoplasma, you will have a beneficial effect in many, many instances for people who are suffering from cancer. Well, in one of the issues of our journal, and again I say I got a number here, but in one of them, which is volume 7, number 2, we have an article. It's called 2 Cancers, 2 Treatment Protocols, and 2 Outcomes. And it's about 2 ladies who a year ago, August, were both diagnosed with cancer of the left breast. They had certain x-rays or whatever, and it showed in both cases the lump, and in both cases they went and they had an initial operation to remove the lump. Then both were asked by their medical doctor, come back in because we want to do a further operation to remove additional material we didn't get in the first place. And then we want you to take chemotherapy, and we want you to take radiation. Now this was posed to both these ladies, and the one lady met me at our conference in Windsor a year ago, August, and she said, Don, this has been the diagnosis, this has been the recommendation, but I am not going to take further surgery, I'm not going to take chemotherapy, I'm not going to take radiation. Instead of that, I'm going to respond the way the Common Cause Medical Research Foundation indicates as a way to respond. I'm going to take hyperbaric treatments, where she gets into a large sealed container, as it were, and under double atmospheric pressures she's exposed to pure oxygen. And she said, I'm also going to take a treatment for a viral infection, minocycline, and this is never done for cancer ordinarily. And she was also going to take some colloidal silver towards the end. And that lady, within 3 months, was totally clear of cancer of her breast. Within 3 months, she was totally clear, without further surgery, without the chemotherapy, and without radiation. The other lady, given the same diagnosis, said, all right, I'll come back in for further surgery, which she did, and then I'll take the chemotherapy, which she did, several months of it. Then I will take the radiation, which she did. And only yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, I was talking to my wife in Sudbury, and she told me that this particular lady, who took all of this formal, standard, conventional treatment for cancer, the cancer had come back in a very serious way, and the prognosis was she wouldn't live many months. Now, what's the summary of that particular anecdote? Well, the summary is this, that both ladies diagnosed the same disease. One takes one treatment that doesn't involve chemotherapy, doesn't involve radiation, doesn't involve additional surgery, and she gets recovery within 3 months. The other takes it all, and a year later she's on a path towards the grave, even though she took all of this. Well, back to Dr. Nicholson. Dr. Nicholson, who had done the research, and Dr. Shyh-Ching, who had also demonstrated that cancers are involved with the mycoplasma, he was one of the people we had at our conference in Sudbury. And we brought him at great expense from California to speak at our meeting. And we went to the local media. We went to the local television outlet. We went to the local CBC program or station. We went to the local Sudbury Star newspaper. And none of them reported that this world leader in mycoplasma research and in cancer research was going to be in Sudbury for a very reasonable $15. You could attend his lecture on the mycoplasma. That was all ignored by the media. Now, and further guests, we had William Bloom. Now, a lot of people don't know who William Bloom is, and that's natural because he, although he's been involved in writing on the current political scene in Washington, D.C. for a number of years, he is not syndicated in, say, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, or something like that. William Bloom had been with the American Foreign Service at the time that the U.S. government and the CIA deposed President Allende of Chile and replaced him with General Pinochet, who imposed his dictatorship on Chile. William Bloom, in protest, had retired from the American Foreign Service and moved back to Washington, where he began writing critiques of American foreign policy for journals and newspapers and so on. Well, I had never really heard of him, but one night on CNN, I was watching the CNN news, and they came on with a news item that Osama bin Laden had released another tape of a television, or of an interview which was televised. And in that television interview, Osama bin Laden said, if the people of America want to know why the people of the Middle East are so opposed to the U.S., they should read the book by William Bloom called Rogue State, 50 years of criminal activity by the CIA. And then they interviewed William Bloom, and they said, how does it feel to be recommended to the American public by Osama bin Laden? He said, well, fine, because book sales have shot up. And I ordered the books, got his address, phoned him up, and we made arrangements to bring him to Sudbury for our conference to talk about how the CIA was involved in a whole range of criminal activities, including the development of the AIDS cofactors. A lot of people have no idea where AIDS comes from, and their professional caregivers will tell them, we don't know where it comes from. There is a story that a white airline steward by the name of Gaetan Juga had once had sex with a black woman who had been butchering a green monkey that bit her and gave her a simian immune deficiency virus, which her body converted to a human immune deficiency virus, and she sexually gave it to Gaetan Juga of the Air Canada. He was a purser for Air Canada. And when he traveled around the United States, he spread it to a number of homosexual friends of his, and that is how AIDS got started in the United States, according to the gobbledygook that you get from the National Institutes for Health. Well, anyway, this is the kind of research that William Bloom was doing and reporting on and had written about, and we had him to our conference, and we were talking about how AIDS was actually developed in American laboratories from two sources. One, the Mycoplasma, which was derived from the Brucella bacteria, and the Scrapie or Wiesner virus from sheep. He's not a doctor. William Bloom came up to Sudbury, presented this very important paper. Again, we notified the Sudbury Star. Again, we notified CBC. Again, we notified the local television outlet. And again, none of them said anything about him coming to Sudbury and being available with a public lecture, again for the very insignificant fee of $15, which didn't cover our expenses at all, but which would help. And he and Dr. Nicholson and a number of other experts in areas of serious concern to the average citizen, problems related to, for example, Alzheimer's, AIDS, Parkinson's disease. Think of all the people involved now with Parkinson's disease. Muhammad Ali, Michael J. Fox, the late Pope John Paul, Billy Graham, and others. They all have demonstrated Parkinson's disease, and yet the science available shows us that Parkinson's disease is involved with the mycoplasma. And this kind of research we try to make available to the public through our annual conferences, through our journals, but we have a very hard time doing it because the major public media just won't say anything to the public about it. And the people go ahead and have heavy surgery, chemotherapy, radiation for breast cancer, and they still die. Whereas a patient refuses the surgery, refuses the chemotherapy, refuses the radiation, and the cancer's gone in 3 months. So this is the kind of research that we've been doing. This is the kind of research that we report upon in our journal. This is the kind of research that we share with people at our annual conferences. But again, this is the kind of research that is not passed on to the public. And we had a terrible time in Sudbury with the media refusing to share the fact that these experts were available to the public, but that information was not passed on to the public, many of whom would probably have liked to learn about their presence and come out and listen and ask questions. Well, that's kind of a long-winded summary of what we're doing.
Well, that's fine. Now, your latest 4-part series of the journal revolves around assassinations, AIDS. Part 1 is AIDS and in John F. Kennedy era and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. AIDS Part 2 in Watergate. Now I understand this is January 2007. Part 3 is just coming out, you say, the first week of February?
No, it's being mailed on Friday.
Oh,
tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Oh, okay, so the Part 3 is coming out.
Part 3 will be in the mail tomorrow, and then Part 4 will be 3 months later. And the whole thing is that AIDS was manufactured in laboratories in Canada and the United States and Great Britain, mainly in the United States. But Canada's culpable in all of this research, and your listeners may or may not know that, for example, when all this research was initially going on, it started back in the late 1940s, the CIA and the National Institutes for Health in the United States asked the government of Canada, will you help us in this work or this undertaking? And the government of Canada said, yes, we will. And what does you want us to do? Well, the U.S. said, well, look, this disease agent that we're working with, and at the time they didn't identify it, but we now realize it's the Mycoplasma. The disease agent that we're working with, we think can be communicated by mosquito bites. Now, you can't communicate AIDS because AIDS is not just a mycoplasma, which puts down the immune system. It is coupled with the Visna virus from sheep, which causes which is a retrovirus. It backs up through the RNA to the DNA and so on. But we think that the one element, the mycoplasma, can be carried by mosquitoes. And we want to test this, but we don't want to test it in the United States for a variety of reasons. They broke their own rule and did test it a couple of times, but won't go into that. But we would like the government of Canada to cooperate with us. So do you know what the government of Canada did? They went to Belleville, Ontario, and they took over a large building, I think it was an old factory, and they refurbished it all and made the windows, sealed the windows, and controlled the air conditioning and all the rest of it. And they started to breed mosquitoes. The government of Canada set out to breed 100 million mosquitoes a month. Then they took those mosquitoes every month, they shipped them to Queen's University. Now here's Queen's University, which is supposed to be a leading Canadian university serving the people of Canada and of the world and so on. And Dr. Reed, Wilford Reed, head of biology at Queen's University, accepted these 100 million mosquitoes into his care, and he would infect them with different variations of the disease agents provided by the United States, including the Mycoplasma. And then he would give these to the Canadian military, who would share them with the American military and the British military. And in certain communities, in the middle of the night, they would have huge air-conditioned vans come into the middle of a small town, and they would lift the sides of the van and very gently turn on fans that would waft the infected mosquitoes out into the community. They would close the van down and quietly drive away into the night. And then the next day, and for 3 or 4 days after, the village would be inundated with mosquitoes. People would be going around remarking on the mosquitoes turning up. And then within 6 weeks or so, people would begin presenting with various diseases, especially chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, this was done by Queen's University and by the Government of Canada. And when we discovered this and other elements of the research, and we were reporting it, I went to Brockville, Ontario, and I rented a public meeting room at the Brockville Hotel in Brockville, and I presented all the evidence about this mosquito breeding in Belleville, mosquito infecting in Queen's University, the Canadian Army dispelling these infected mosquitoes into communities and causing outbreaks of various diseases, because although most people would suffer from chronic fatigue, there were other people whose genetic aptitudes were different, and they would suffer from different diseases. Well, I made this presentation to the people of Brockville, and they were very happy. A number of them were very happy to come out and respond to my announcement in the local press that the meeting would be available to them. And a newspaper reporter for the Brockville Record, or Brockville Times, or whatever it was called, he was there. And after the meeting, he went out and he phoned Queen's University. And he said, this fellow, he's an adjunct professor with the Institute of Molecular Medicine. He has published research and publicly announced it at Brockville that Queen's University was involved in contaminating mosquitoes and putting these contaminated mosquitoes out into the communities, including the community of Brockville, among other places. And Queen's University said, well, if Professor Scott says that again, we will sue him. So I immediately said it again, and I immediately called a press conference to which only one reporter came, and I reported it again, and I sent a copy of the press release to Queen's University, and I've been hounding them ever since. When are you going to sue me? For goodness sakes, I'm waiting. And this has been somewhere around now 8 or 9 years. I'm waiting for you to sue me. Because if you do, which I will welcome, I will ask that the court subpoena your records of Dr. Reed and contaminating these mosquitoes and what you did with them. And, you know, they never replied to any of this. They dropped it immediately. Now, what, of course, had happened was when the Dean of Medicine was called by the Brockville reporter, he probably, well, given the benefit of the doubt, he probably or possibly didn't know that back in the late 40s and early 50s, Queen's University was working with these gangsters in the early CIA. And that he thought that what I was saying was probably sheer nonsense. But afterwards, he would then go to those who know what's going on in Queens, and he would learn, oh my God, here we are engaged in contaminating mosquitoes with a mycoplasma, which can cause, at the one end of the scale, chronic fatigue syndrome, but at the other end of the scale can cause Alzheimer's. So drop it. And I've been after them ever since. I hound them once every 6 months or so by writing letters to their chancellor and so on. And the point is that the Government of Canada and people in the universities of Canada, because there were others besides Queen's University, but we don't have that evidence like we have it for Queen's. We got very solid evidence that Queen's was contaminating these mosquitoes. We also know in very good detail about the Belleville mosquito breeding activities. So the Mycoplasma developed as a disease agent. What was the prime purpose? The prime purpose was to put it into vaccines, principally smallpox vaccine, and along with it put in the cofactor, the retrovirus from the Viesness disease of sheep, and go over to Africa and vaccinate as many black people as they can, or could. And they vaccinated millions. And within 5 years, those who took the vaccinations against smallpox began presenting with the symptoms of AIDS. And as a consequence, today, 8,000 people in Africa will die of AIDS. Tomorrow, 8,000 people will die of AIDS. And the day after, and on into the future, the population of Africa is being decimated by AIDS, and that AIDS came from the United States with the cooperation of Canada, and one of the disease elements is the Mycoplasma, and that's why in John Hopkins medical text you will find no reference to the Mycoplasma.
Now, is this a conclusion that you would say leads to population control?
It is absolutely population control, yeah.
Yeah, that's... and of course, you made these references to Queen's, and they've completely backed down then.
Oh, absolutely.
So we've heard this story in other areas as well, with mind control, MKULTRA experiments in Winnipeg, Edmonton, Vancouver, other hospitals taking part in maybe something that in the Cold War era was thought maybe was more palatable to carry out, but nowadays people are saying this is unbelievable that you would infect unknown populations, or people going in to treat a nerve disorder in an arm, and then they're put to sleep for 2 weeks for psychic driving, things of...
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Allen Memorial Hospital.
And Dr. Cameron Ewan,
yeah,
and so on, his research. But he was a part of the MKULTRA program, and their development of AIDS came under that program too. Ultra really meant more or less umbrella. And under MKULTRA there was the CIA program MK Delta. Now the MK stands for monkey kidney, because this mycoplasma is grown on monkey kidneys. And Delta stands for Delta University, or Delta of the Mississippi River, where Tulane University is located in New Orleans, and they created the Delta Primate Farm, where they bred rhesus monkeys for their to harvest their kidneys, and on those kidneys to grow the mycoplasma. And all of this is part of the development of AIDS, and it was all under the aegis initially of...
No, I can agree and accept that. I just have a question. With this reference to MKULTRA, is this a conclusion, or did anyone, other than being MK, what leads you to make the conclusion or the statement that it was, your opinion, a monkey kidney?
Oh, well, we know. We have...
And I'm just, the origin of the name MKULTRA.
Yeah,
there's MK Delta.
Yeah.
And Naomi and Bluebird, right?
Yeah. Well, we have, for example, many medical articles from peer-reviewed journals of medicine by the doctors involved, because there's kind of a strange thing at work here. These doctors that were developing these diseases and so on were not only just being population control freaks, they were also scientists who valued their scientific skills their acumen, and the writing of the articles in JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine, and so on. And in those articles, and we've got all kinds of them. There's an article, for example, by Dr. Couch and Dr. Shyh-Ching, who are tied in with Baylor Medical School in Texas, and they talk about the MK program, which is monkey kidney, and they tell about how they used the monkey kidneys from the rhesus monkeys grown on the Delta primate farm, and how they then tested those on prisoners at Huntsville Penitentiary in Texas, and how they then got started on a two-part program to develop the AIDS cofactors, one part being conducted in essentially in Brazil and the Portuguese colonies in Africa, and the other part being conducted in French colonies or Belgian Congo facilities by Dr. Hilary Kaprowski. Mm-hmm. And all the way through you find the references to monkey kidney culture of a disease, unknown disease agent. And if you have a chance to read a very significant book by Ed Hooper called The River, A History of AIDS, it's 1,400 pages long, but there are several sections in there where it talks about the MK, monkey kidney disease agents. And it all ties in with the literature from JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine. And in our four-part series on AIDS, the first two parts you've received, the third part we'll receive next week because it's going in the mail tomorrow. The fourth part will come out in 3 months' time. The fourth part is what we call the scientific paper trail, showing how the initial accidental discoveries became the focus of more concentrated studies, and how those then led to experiments with altered disease agents, until you get to the point in June the 9th, 1969, where 14 congressmen of the United States Congress meet with Dr. MacArthur, who was head of biological research for the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. And Dr. MacArthur says, on June the 9th, 1969, this is available for you to see yourself. You can get copies from our foundation if you want to read it yourself. But he tells these congressmen who vote on what they call the black budget, that if he was given $10 million in 5 to 10 years' time, they could finish the research that they were doing on a new microorganism, and I'm quoting from memory, a new microorganism, one which does not naturally exist, and one which is refractory to the human immune system, and thereby exposes people to diseases that ordinarily they slough off. And there are a number of diseases that people with AIDS die of. They don't die of AIDS, they die of the fact that their body is not able to fend off these otherwise minor diseases such as pleural pneumonia. At one time it was not a danger at all. But if the person's immune system is down, then pleural pneumonia presents itself rigorously in the AIDS patient and kills them.